Hey, welcome back to another episode of Duly Diagnosed, where we discuss all things mental health related. So today we've got Ahmed Mayet in the studio. Ahmed is a clinical psychologist in private practice. He also provides psychotherapeutic interventions at ARC Recovery Center. And you've got a special interest in personality.
Yes, personality as it relates to addiction and as well as spirituality.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Okay. So I think, let's get started. What does all of that mean, Ahmed?
Well, I think I've always been interested in what makes us human in a lot of ways. The human consciousness. What actually gives us the unique qualities of being human. And the word personality has been very used in media, used in everyday conversation. Without I felt like it's always without the real meaning of what it is behind. Someone would say, I've got a big personality, or I've got an addictive personality, or a very strong personality. But we have to get down to basics as well.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like very colloquial kind of like terms. So you want to drill down into the scientific sort of aspects of all of that?
Well, the more technical definition, and then like how does it manifest? You got the Western model,
yes,
by so many theorists like, your Freuds and your Kleins and your Kohutts and Kernbergs. But there's also the spiritual model, and I myself, being a religious person, a spiritual person, I think, in fact, I would take more of my own understanding of myself and of my patients with that model in mind too, especially with regards to addiction.
Yeah.
Because it's, even if you look at the 12-step AA model, there are the steps of surrendering to higher powers, allowing that to actually take hold, whether the patient's believing God or not.
Okay.
But I think it's important to understand, from the Western model and the spiritual model, how actually personality works.
Yeah. Do you wanna sort of give us an overview of the Western model?
So, you have your 5-factor model, developed by McRae and Costa, which is your neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. I myself don't follow that model.
Okay.
I think it's a very good indicator, where you lie on these kinds of factors.
Okay.
And what it actually means about how you interact. For example, neuroticism. What are your thinking patterns? What are your cognitive patterns? How do you actually think about things? Do you get neurotic? Are you a thinker of, do you overthink? Do you, mull over situations? Do you ruminate?
Yeah.
Agreeableness. Extroversion.
So neuroticism is generally relating to negative emotion.
I wouldn't say negative emotion per se, but it's mostly about what are your thinking patterns around your environment, and that can be influenced by genetics, by biological factors, as well as environmental factors.
Okay.
There's even the sort of spectrum that we have in clinical settings, where you got your neuroticism, borderline in the middle, and then psychosis on the other end as well.
Okay.
But most people find themselves between neuroticism and borderline. When you say borderline, I mean personality dysfunction.
Okay.
In a lot of ways.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so and then you went on to extroversion.
Extroversion would be, again, the concept of an extrovert and an introvert and the ambivert, which is a kind of amalgamation of the two.
Okay.
That would be like how are you in social situations? Are you the outgoing type? Do you thrive in social situations? Is your level of extroversion high?
Yeah.
Or is it a bit low? Do you find yourself awkward in social settings? Unable to pay attention to a lot of the variety of social situations that you come across.
So from a vocational point of view, it might be helpful to understand those 5 factors. Salespeople are generally high in extroversion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Okay.
That and again, that comes from genetics or environment, or those kinds of things. You have a. I mean, I've known families with almost a kind of sales pedigree.
Okay.
Where
I hear you.
the father is a charismatic man, and he influences his sons or daughters to be that way. And they sort of come from a family of extroversion.
Okay.
And which is why they're able to do things. Oh, absolutely, you're right. I think vocationally, that 5-factor model is very good.
Okay, helpful. Yeah. Okay. And then from the spiritual sort of concept, I mean, is it safe to say from the Eastern perspective, or?
Well, I mean, I could only speak from my own religious point of view. I mean, and my understanding of other Eastern sort of models, sort of such as Hinduism, Buddhism, those kinds of models. I would only have to speak from the Islamic perspective.
Okay.
I think if we come back to the sort of DSM-5 model, when we say that what is personality, it's this kind of enduring pattern of like inner experience and behavior, and it affects 4 main things. Now we're moving away from the 5-factor model, more of a DSM-5 understanding. The first thing would be cognition, which is your thought processes, your thinking. Again, very similar to neuroticism and the 5-factor model.
Okay.
And the second one would be affect. Affect would be your emotions and your desires. In my one of my supervisors in my internship often told me that affect is basically what your face shows.
Okay.
You can have a reactive affect, meaning do you react to things around you? When you see something bad happening, does it show on your face?
Okay.
Can you actually react to something? Or is your face restricted? Is your affect restricted? Is it blunted, or is it flat?
Yeah.
Or is it labile, up and down? There's this, and we often use it in in the clinical setting. Affect is a big part of your mental state examination.
Okay. What does it mean if it's flat?
Flat could be any indication of a mood disorder or psychosis in a lot of ways. When we talk about, for example, like bipolar mood disorder type 1 or type 2, when someone is in a depressive episode, their affect might have been blunted or flat. And if you talk about it literally, it's basically no reaction on the face to anything.
Okay.
Of course, we wouldn't know the thought processes behind that, but they are unable to sort of manifest emotion in a kind of way.
Okay.
That would be like a flat affect.
Okay.
Whereas reactive would be, you see an accident on the road and you actually like...
It's like obvious that you...
It's obvious that
surprised
you are...
or...
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, any number of mood disorders or anxiety disorders could affect affect in a lot of ways.
I knew this lady who had schizoid personality disorder, I think it was called. And she had, from what I observed, was a very flat affect. I mean, does that make sense?
That makes sense because schizoid personality disorder is a kind of aversion to social life in a lot of ways.
Okay.
There's this, they might be seen as eccentric, and the schizoid personality disorder actually forms part of cluster A.
Okay.
Of course, I'll go into detail a bit later on the clusters.
Okay.
But on that point, an aversion to social life, very withdrawn, no desire for close relationships, no desire for any sexual kind of relationship.
Okay.
So a flat affect is very much in congruence with the case you're describing.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we got affect, and then we got another 3, eh?
2 more.
Yeah.
Interpersonal functioning.
Okay.
I mean, how do you interact with others?
Yeah.
Do you desire a relationship with others? Are you trusting? Are you able to, form human connections, or do you have this kind of up and down? For example, with borderline personality disorder, there's this back and forth of idealizing and devaluing of people, especially in a clinical setting. A borderline personality disorder patient, one day their therapist would be, the best person on the planet.
Okay.
The person that the only person that cares for them, the only person that actually loves them, the only person that, and then there's one sort of false move from the therapist. Maybe a failure to communicate, or something that they said unintentionally, and then the therapist is devalued immediately.
Okay.
So this plays into interpersonal functioning as well as with narcissists, histrionics, and from the cluster C personality disorders. Are you overly dependent on people in your life? Are you overly avoidant, or are you obsessed with rules? Are you obsessed with these kinds of things? So this would all affect interpersonal functioning.
Okay.
And the last one would be impulse control.
Okay.
And this is where the problem of addiction comes in.
Yeah.
When your personality sort of deviates very, very much from what is expected of you, or what is expected of you according to your culture, according to your spiritual affinity or religiosity, then impulse control is greatly affected. And that's mostly in the cluster B of personality disorders, and then this is where addiction comes in. Impulsive behavior, the kind of behavior that leads to self-destruction in a lot of ways, and because they haven't really honed any kind of impulse control. Of course, this is affected by environmental factors, genetics as well,
biological
as well.
So I've always been very interested in ADHD because I've been diagnosed with it, right? So I think a lot of the differential diagnosis for ADD for adolescents is ODD, right? Which is oppositional defiance disorder. So an ADHD child could present with things that look like they're being like incredibly outrageously rebellious and so on. But ADHD from a physiological sort of perspective, the person is by default impulsive, right? Is there a distinct separation or difference from personality, having an impulsive personality, and having an impulsive physiologically, sort of how you made up? And does it make sense? Like, so
yeah, I think when it comes to personality, it's the kind of, because it's so much deeper than,
if you treat the ADHD and you treat the impulsivity, right? Okay, impulsivity, the symptoms should stop sort of coming up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So going through the process, I suppose, of distinguishing between, is it personality or is it physiological? Is it obvious to you that there's that difference?
Well, because of personality, for example, there's a lot of it's very pervasive. It's across all situations. It's inflexible, and you can't really be. Yes, it can be treated with medication in terms of your Ritalin and Concertas and that kind of, because you're short acting and long acting. I myself, I have seen situations mainly with children. I haven't done much experience with adult ADHD.
Yeah.
But I think, in my own understanding of it, there's with ADHD, there's this kind of if it's just that and it's not so much about a personality, then it's more about that inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity that can be treated with a kind of supportive therapy, and a medication, medicinal approach. But when it comes to personality, the key factor is how much else would it be affecting.
Okay.
Now, for example, with just ADHD, there's this. It would mainly affect cognition and perhaps impulse control, and maybe a little bit of interpersonal functioning, because you're unable to pay attention in a conversation, you're unable to follow a train of thought. But with personality, there's a lot more in interpersonal functioning.
Okay.
The key factor of when treating personality disorders is what kind of reaction does the patient elicit in you. as
As a therapist?
as a therapist.
Okay.
If you get this kind of, it's an unspoken feeling, really,
Yeah.
of for example, you might find ADHD among cluster B personality disorders like histrionics, borderline, antisocial, and narcissistic. But and you'll also find it in cluster A, which is like the social aversion.
Okay.
But in a clinical setting, if I go back to even the old word of countertransference, what exactly is this person eliciting in you? Do you feel like this is a pervasive pattern of, they're unable to actually interact? They're deliberately, almost unconsciously and deliberately creating a kind of unwanted feeling in the therapist.
Okay. I hear you.
But with ADHD, you can, of course it comes with experience, but with ADHD, there's this, okay, no. This person is just lacking focus.
Okay. I hear you. Okay.
There's nothing else.
Because there's some mania involved with ADHD, although it's not like, it seems like it's manageable kind of mania, and I hear what you're saying, yeah. So you can, okay. So, yeah, dinner parties must be awkward, hey, like with family, then like they're like always like, hey, are you diagnosing me right now?
I always tell people, like, sort of turn off the psychologist
I hear you, yeah.
Of course, people hear about it, and again, in my Indian community, religious community, psychology is not really. It is favorable, but it's not something people go into.
Really?
It's usually medicine, engineering, accounting, or religious studies.
Okay.
But like my parents' generation. I remember having a conversation with my father once that, has he ever thought about therapy? And he had this kind of, no, I've got my wife and my children. The sort of attitude towards mental health. But I think there needs to be a shift to understanding that mental health is very important, and there's nothing wrong with seeking the help of a professional.
Well, I think there's two things. I think at the moment what we're going through as a society, I think it's kind of making it very apparent that people, that mental health needs to be a priority, right? But we spoke. I did a session with Chris, a podcast, and we were talking about how in general South Africa is a very sort of conservative country, and I know from from my experience as well with family and that, it's like psychology is not necessarily something that's people aren't into it. They just aren't. So, but I think that's changing. I really see that changing a lot lately. But on that note, so like culturally, that obviously plays a lot into personality, does it?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think, for example, if we go back to that DSM-5 model of, a personality becomes a disorder when it deviates from the individual's culture.
Okay, sure.
For example, spending a lot on a wedding, for example, like over 100,000 or 150,000. Now, let's say this is the bride we're talking about. Putting aside all the kind of bridezilla and kind of archetypes.
Yeah. Okay.
If we look at sort of an Indian bride versus a bride from an English culture.
Yeah.
Spending a lot of family around, a lot of people around, having a week-long sort of celebration.
Yeah.
Now that might be very cognizant and congruent of the Indian culture. A week-long celebration.
Yeah.
From all these different kind of prayer ceremonies and religious ceremonies, and then the wedding only being right at the end of the week.
Okay.
Now, that might be that's seen as normal or traditional or typical of an Indian culture, but from an English culture that might be seen as impulsive behavior.
Okay.
how can you spend so much that's reckless?
I hear you. Okay.
How can you actually, invite so many people and spend so many exorbitant amounts of money?
Yeah.
That's just a small example of lifestyle, really. And the bride wanting certain things for the wedding that might be seen as deviation
Yeah.
from another perspective,
Yeah.
but in her culture that is perfectly congruent.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other situations as well. Even when it comes to religious behavior.
Yeah.
For example,
Can I interrupt you?
yeah. Go
So
on.
I mean, even excuse me. So generally speaking, females get to the age of sort of like their early 30s, right? Generally speaking, they start to realize, if they haven't had children yet, that they're running the sort of the clock's ticking, right? So a deviation sort of from that, from the idea of sort of setting up a family unit and having children, which is generally speaking, it's pretty normal across all cultures, right? Somebody deviating from that wildly, just as a matter of sort of like a personal choice, okay, or deciding to pursue a career as opposed to deciding to pursue a family.
Yes.
I mean, it's not necessarily an indication that there's something wrong in terms of personality or anything like that. But it's just it's a decision, but it is, and it's a choice, but it is wildly different from the cultural norm. Any comments on that?
Well, I think that the two main things when it comes to diagnosis of personality disorders is that there's the two main things is that firstly, in order for it to be diagnosed, it has to cause dysfunction.
Okay.
The person is not able to live harmoniously and in balance because of these personality traits. Like,
Okay.
Their cognition is being distorted in some way. They have no impulse control. Interpersonal functioning is quite difficult, and they're struggling with expression of emotion through affect.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say a woman who pursues a career and instead of a family life is
Dysfunctional.
dysfunctional.
Yeah.
If it causes dysfunction and it causes impairment,
Yeah.
in any part of their life, work, social, family.
Well, let's say from a cultural point of view. Sorry, I don't want to distract you too much from your but I mean, from a cultural point of view, let's say the culture, or the family, sort of is like, listen, you're supposed to have a kid now. You're supposed to be married and have a child. What the hell are you doing? So in a lot of ways, that would present as interpersonal dysfunction, right?
Yes, I would say that. But it's important on how does she feel about it.
Okay.
Does she feel like this is causing dysfunction? Do I need to change?
Yeah.
Do I need to, start coming to a better cultural understanding, and perhaps, come to the place in which I can sort of maybe merge my wanting of career. So maybe finding a husband or finding a partner who would be okay with her pursuing a career.
Yeah.
So she would, that is sort of far more harmonious for her own life.
Yeah.
And how she deals with her family and how she deals with, people who are in her life.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think, so I mean, if you get an example of that,
Yeah.
now, if she's in a clinical setting, and I'm treating her, and I see, okay, there is an aversion over here to social life. She doesn't really desire a relationship. She doesn't really feel like there's anything. She's very much loner.
Yeah.
And if it's causing dysfunction, and if it's causing impairment, if she comes to me with a clinical complaint, like, I don't know what's wrong with me.
Okay.
Why don't I want relationship? Why don't I want a partner? I just want to do my own thing. Now, that may very well warrant a diagnosis of schizoid personality disorder.
Okay.
But again, it's so varied, especially
Yeah, it's intense. I mean, you must have to spend a lot of time thinking about these cases. Sure. Yeah.
especially with our world of moving towards. I mean, this has happened even late 20th century, I guess.
Yeah.
Women moving towards a more working world.
Yes. Yeah.
Now we have to look at the whole zeitgeist of society.
Yeah.
That, okay, it's not a deviation that is looked at.
Yeah, it's like a
as
cultural
dysfunction.
shift that's happening.
It's a whole cultural shift. So that's why it's so important to have that individual. Like, okay, this woman is pursuing a career because that's what she wants. She wants to advance. She wants to be the best she can be.
Yeah.
And
family doesn't fit in with that
family
equation.
doesn't fit in with that. And that's okay. But another woman might want that because she has no desire for relationships. And she ends up alone every day without anyone to talk to. She doesn't desire it. And it's causing dysfunction. That's a possible diagnosis of schizoid personality disorder.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay, cool. So where were we? We were discussing the we were moving on to the eastern sort of.
Yeah. So I mean, if we think about the models of personality, if I take the sort of the one of the most prominent Western theorists would be Sigmund Freud. He's like the grandfather of
psychology,
of psychoanalysis. And if we look at his model, comparing, one of my favorite Islamic scholars, Imam al-Ghazali. Now, there's this kind of comparison between the two and what their model is for human personality. If we look at Freud, for example, he has the topographical or is it psychological model of human personality, the id, ego, and superego. Id is something that we're all born with. It's sort of from birth. It's very unconscious. It's sort of if we look at the iceberg model that has been used so many times in our textbooks. Id is like right at the bottom. It's what you don't see. It's your kind of biological drives. Hunger, thirst, sex, whatever it is, biological desires. It's a kind of animal instinct. And as you grow older, there's a development of the ego. So the ego has to come almost keep the id in control, because you cannot sort of act out all animal instincts at once. If I use a very crude example, I use this example because it's so impactful. Man walking in the street sees a very beautiful woman. Now his id wants to go and copulate immediately.
Sure. Okay.
It's that almost unconscious biological drive. And he looks at her, and the man's imagination runs wild, and the ego says, "Oh, hold on, you can't just do that." You want her. I think it's you need to go and foster some kind of communication with her. And maybe create a relationship. There's a process. Become a friend. Move on to dating, and then and then you might end up really liking her and then marrying her. And so the id is a kind of
handbrake.
So the id works on what we call the pleasure principle.
Oh, sorry, no, not the id. It's not the handbrake. Handbrake's the ego. Okay.
Well, the handbrake.
In a sense.
In a certain sense. So the id works on the pleasure principle, whereas the ego works on the reality principle. Works on the kind of no, hold on, this is real life. You can't just do whatever you want. And the last thing to develop, and this is obviously influenced by parenting, environment, genetics, the development of a superego. This is what works on the morality principle. So the superego is saying, control yourself completely. You can't even look at her. You can't even do anything because you need to live a moral life. And a moral life doesn't include sex, doesn't include any kind of fulfillment of desire. So that's the kind of authoritative parent inside your mind. And we say, like, for example, people who are antisocial and people who are, when I say antisocial, I mean clinically antisocial personality disorder. They have very weak superegos.
Okay. Like the obvious example that comes to mind now is that Tinder swindler character. Okay.
Exactly. I will do whatever I want. I will do whatever I can to get what I want.
Yeah.
Steal, lie, cheat. So they say,
And not realize that it's just it's unsustainable.
The kind of criminal nature has a very weak superego.
Okay, weak superego. So I mean, again, sorry, I pulled this book out for us earlier, which is a cool book. Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. Archetypes, right? I mean, so from what I understand, it's very limited, yes. So just forgive me if I get this totally wrong. But archetypes, I mean, in terms of morality, that stems in a lot of ways from our collective idea of archetypes, right? Does that make sense?
I think so. The thing is, in your universities, they actually don't like to study Jung.
I believe so.
Because Freud and Jung had a falling out.
Yes.
Freud had a complete insistence on the sexual interpretation of clinical material. People are fixated in certain ways. And that's always to do with sexuality. And Jung had a more spiritual kind of interpretation.
Sure, yeah.
So they had a big falling out.
Okay.
And Carl Jung is actually taken out of the syllabus of many clinic, especially my.
And why is that though? I mean, is it just because people favor Freud's theories, or is it because archetypes and sort of morality is something that's not really, I don't know. What was the reason for that?
No, in my understanding, it was because Freud had spawned so many other theorists. He had his daughter Anna, and then Melanie Klein, and from there a lot of other theorists came. And whereas Jung sort of did his own thing.
Okay,
it's what we call analytical psychology, if I'm not mistaken.
On Jung's side.
On Jung's side.
Okay,
and Jungian therapy is, if I'm correct, it's not that much practiced anymore. And I think because Freud, there's a joke of Freud had a better publicist.
Okay.
Okay.
I know the guys from AA and NA. They often refer to Jung because he took on the spiritual sort of angle, and there was some communication between Bill Wilson, the guy who started AA, and Carl Jung. There was a letter. And Jung really endorsed in a lot of ways the AA concept and all of that. So, yeah. Okay, so do you know? Okay, I'm going to bring up Jordan Peterson. Are you familiar with him?
I am familiar with him. I haven't watched much of his material.
Okay.
But I mean, you tell me, right?
He seems to be a huge fan as well of Carl Jung, which, and it's like you say, it's. I mean, he mentions that in general. At universities and that kind of thing, that it's not taught and it's frowned upon. I think I remember him saying that he was told by his lecturers that if he brings it up, he's going to be sort of like an outcast, or but he really sort of goes into detail around, like, for example, archetypes that you find in your Disney movies, like what's it called, Lion King and Pinocchio. Pinocchio being this unruly little, well, geez, he goes on for hours and hours about it. It's really interesting. But lots of archetype kind of stuff there. But tell me from a, so AA and NA, right? They've got these, or let's say, let's call it the 12 steps, right? They've got these spiritual principles that are outlined in the 12 steps. Okay, and it's a movement towards a spiritual ideal, which, am I correct in saying that ties in with archetypes and things like that?
Well, I would say that in some ways, because there's this kind of shift, and if we even look at my Islamic understanding of it, is that there's a shift from being the hero, the archetypal hero, to moving towards a journey. And you'll notice a lot of science fiction and fantasy has this hero's journey
Yes.
narrative. And it's sort of moving from, okay, can the hero complete the journey and can he become to the point of the sage or the wise man? Is he able to move on and guide other heroes on their journeys?
Okay.
And that's, if I'm not mistaken, step 12 is about that. It's about,
Yeah, sort of getting, what is step 12? Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of making these steps and carrying the message to the addict who still suffers, right? So, sort of becoming selfless in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not just about achieving your own goals, but you have to give back and guide others towards what you have achieved too. The sort of mystical item that is always sought after, in the hero's journey. What is that? Is it the peace of knowing that I'm a recovering addict, but I'm not guided by my impulses anymore, and I can help others, control their impulses too. And I've sort of through these steps, I've almost honed my own personality to become someone who can guide others.
Okay, so on that note, I think that sounds like something relatively easy to do for somebody that isn't entirely dysfunctional because of their personality issues, right? I know guys, so I remember hearing it once said that guys that are antisocial sort of use the 12 steps as an external moral compass because their sort of internal moral compass isn't necessarily working. Any comments on that?
I think you obviously need, like I said, if you come back to the Freud's model, the super ego, if it's not developed, it's very hard to develop after that.
Is it?
To get any kind of morality.
Okay.
To get any kind of ethical compass. And I would absolutely be in favor of any kind of help. I mean, yes, because the 12 steps reaches to something bigger than yourself, it would be very powerful in helping someone who's antisocial. Antisocial is actually, you pick the toughest one. But, someone who's narcissistic or histrionic or borderline, that would work far better.
Okay.
Tragically, I've treated an antisocial patient once, and my supervisor told me this guy belongs in jail.
Okay.
Because he cannot use anything.
Okay.
He cannot use any kind of external compass.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
But again, it's
that's sad, eh?
Absolutely. And it comes from an unforgiving society as well.
It's sad and scary, eh? At the same time, yeah. Unforgiving society, sure.
Absolutely. But I would agree with you, Ryan, that if you're looking for some kind of guidance, if the antisocial comes to the point of I'm looking for some kind of guidance, I have nothing from myself, then something as powerful as the 12 steps can absolutely be used, because it's a surrender, basically.
Can I, before we get into that, I've often wondered about indoctrination being a means to help people, and that might sound completely and entirely absurd, but I know of places that sort of have that as a modus operandi, where they literally indoctrinate people. And so, I mean, I've often thought that, would I want sort of a friend back from this place that is indoctrinated and alive and staying clean, or somebody that's going to kill themselves because of their behavior? Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a tough one. I wouldn't know what to actually say in that situation. There's this do you keep someone happy and with no mind of their own, but clean, or are you able to actually move to a point of, I think indoctrination would be the last resort.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. In a lot of cases it is, though. Hey, like, I mean, we were talking about the antisocial person, sort of, people have been to rehab like 17 times and they end up in this place and they're thoroughly brainwashed and sort of come out and live this weird existence, like you said. It is a tough one, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Islamic. You mentioned. I'm actually quite interested in what you have to say around that and psychology and how it sort of works together. Yeah.
So, like I said, one of the Islamic scholars, Al-Ghazali,
Yeah.
there can be a bit of a comparison between the spiritual model and what Freud says about the id, ego, superego, but it's on a very superficial level. So there's this kind of model of the soul. Now, the main thing about Western versus spiritual or Eastern models is that the Western model, almost every theorist omits the idea of a soul.
Okay.
It's all biological, it's all physiological, but there's no spiritual sort of concept. And I myself, being religious and spiritual, there is the idea of the soul, and mostly all religions have that idea.
Yes. Yeah.
And the soul is a kind of connection to God.
Okay.
Connection to anything higher than oneself. And the soul is actually the essence of the human being.
Yes. Okay.
Which is really omitted by the Western model. So what we talk about in Islam is there sort of 3 levels of the soul.
Okay.
In some ways, I'm speaking about quite sacred knowledge here. So if I was to say that, God forgive me if I do make mistakes.
Okay.
when I explain
Okay.
this.
Cool.
In that, there's the kind of the lowest soul, which is the drive towards the animal instinct.
Okay.
Again, hunger, thirst, anger, lust, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Now, if a person is living at that level, it means that they are comfortable or unconsciously comfortable with the corruption of the soul through reckless pursuit of desire.
Okay.
Reckless pursuit of any kind of biological need, without any thought of consequence, without any thought of aftermath. And then there's the next level, which is the self-reproaching soul, meaning that there is a kind of guilt attached to any kind of deviation from God's path.
Okay.
For example, like in Islam, you would say alcohol is forbidden, or premarital sex is forbidden, theft, fraud, taking of interest, associating partners with God. That being the biggest one. Now, the self-reproaching soul, while it may allow the person to engage in those kinds of behaviors, go to the bar, take a drink, but it reproaches itself. It feels guilt.
Okay.
It feels like, what have you done? You need to repent to God.
Okay.
You need to get back onto the path.
Yeah.
It's not done in a punitive way. It's almost
Okay.
an unconscious decision that turns conscious. Like, I do need to repent.
Yeah.
I am on God's path, and I need to, get back to where I was.
Okay. Yeah.
And the last one would be when you reach a level of the calm soul,
Okay.
meaning that you've almost taken control of your impulses,
Okay.
and you are comfortable with what God has apportioned for you, and you don't transgress the limits.
Okay.
Now, most people are at the level of the middle,
Okay.
the self-reproaching soul.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the kind of, you do wrong, you feel bad, you repent,
Yeah.
try to do good.
Yeah.
But there is a creation of a certain cycle
Okay.
of, constantly. And the main thing is to basically polish your soul to the point of reaching the highest one.
Okay.
I myself personally know maybe like 1 or 2 people in my life who
Really?
actually have reached that kind of level.
Okay.
It's not a certificate per se, but you can see it in the person. You
Okay.
can see that this person is a calm soul.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think there's this, and again, if you compare the Western model with the spiritual model or the Islamic model, is that the Western model takes no afterlife into consideration.
Okay. Yeah.
So if we come back to Freud, with the id, ego, superego,
Yeah.
that model is for living now, presently.
Okay.
That model is for living in this world, in this existence, this
Yeah.
domain. Whereas the levels of the souls affects your afterlife as well.
Okay.
You know, if you were a self-reproaching soul, you know, how will that affect you once you pass away?
Yeah.
You know, if you are a calm soul, how will that affect you once you pass away? You know, that's one of the things that the Islamic model takes into a lot of consideration. And
Yeah.
the soul is a kind of, it's the essence of personality.
Being. Personality. Okay.
Yes, it's the essence of human personality, really.
Okay.
You know, the body is secondary to the soul. And the soul is what gets affected by any kind of deviant behavior.
Okay.
You know, sure, I mean, you might be physiologically killing yourself through whether it's addiction, alcohol, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and any kind of hedonistic behavior. But the soul is more important because in the Islamic belief, we believe that the afterlife is the eternal life,
Yeah.
and this is temporary. So the soul is what's going to be facing the consequences at the end.
Yes. Okay.
So your personality is also it's sort of an indicator of your connection to God.
Okay.
How close are you to God? How far away are you?
Mm.
You know, the more deviant you are, the further away you move.
Mm. Mm.
You know, there's so many models of the that Imam al-Ghazali went through.
Oh yeah.
You know, he even talks about the four qualities of a human being in nature.
Okay.
There's the kind of predatory qualities, the bestial, the demonic, and the angelic.
Okay.
So if I talk about the bestial, for example, he compares that to the pig.
Okay.
Now, I'm sure you've seen maybe in movies or, you know, even in real life, when a man is very forward with a woman, or he eats a lot, or I say man just generally as a human being as well.
Yeah.
You know, the woman will call him a pig.
Okay. Yeah.
And, you know, you're eating a lot, your mother might tell you, stop eating like a pig.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, those are the bestial qualities that desires any kind of satisfaction of desire.
Okay.
You know, and you've seen like pigs on a farm, they eat everything.
Yeah.
So that was part of his understanding, Imam al-Ghazali. And then there's the predatory qualities, which he compares to the dog.
Okay.
Now the dog is but of course all of these I just need to say that they all can be trained. A dog can be trained, a pig can be taught certain behaviors to control itself.
Yeah.
Now a dog can be trained as well, but when it's untrained, it barks at everything. It's clumsy.
Yeah.
It runs around. It's predatory.
Yeah.
You know, and it goes for things. You know, so how many cases of, you know, a dog biting someone and then they have to put the dog down
Yeah.
because of, you know, that kind of violent behavior.
Yeah.
Now, that's the predatory quality in human beings
Okay.
and the bestial qualities in human beings. Then you get the demonic qualities.
Okay.
Now, this is what we say when it comes to interpersonal functioning. You know, jealousy, hatred, envy, you know, plotting against people, you know, the kind of sort of this pervasive nature that you get joy at others' misfortune,
Okay.
or you seek the downfall of others. You easily betray people, you know, you do people down in business, and these are all the demonic qualities of that are all inside us, but again, it can be trained and honed and kept down.
Yeah.
And the last one will be the angelic quality or the saintly.
So from Carl Jung's point of view, he talks about the shadow and integrating the shadow. So it's not going to go away. It's going to be there. You got to have it under control, though, voluntary control.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And we believe that God has imbued us with these qualities, but we have to actually train them.
God has imbued us with the demonic qualities.
Well, I mean...
Sorry if I misunderstood.
No, I think according to Al-Ghazali's model, you know, this is...
But I mean, that's interesting because I kind of, in a kind of, you know, I don't want to deviate. I kind of, I see the points of that, though. I mean, it makes sense in a way. Yeah.
See, because we we believe that life is a test, of course,
Yeah.
and we would be given these tests of defects in character
Okay.
and defects in personality as well. And how do we handle that? Do we go with them? Do we actually satisfy these kinds of urges to be a certain way towards our fellow man, or are we able to come back to God
Mm.
and ask for His guidance and ask for His help? You know,
Okay.
and follow the lifestyle of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who is the sort of gold standard of what it is to be a man, what it is to be
Yeah.
everything really. And the last one will be the saintly qualities.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
the love for fellow human beings.
Mm.
You know, a control over your desires, a kind of understanding of people, empathy, love, compassion.
Yeah.
That has to sort of triumph over the other three.
Okay. Okay.
The others have to be kept in check.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, you might look at it as a kind of morbid view because there's three negative and then there's one positive. And that's the kind of challenge that we all have if we take it from an Islamic model.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
the pig, the dog, the demon,
Demon.
the saint,
Okay.
the angel.
Yeah. It's ultimately the movement towards a spiritual ideal. Just, I mean, to put it in a nutshell.
Absolutely.
And in a lot of ways, the 12 steps facilitate that. Most religions facilitate that.
If we look back at the Islamic model as well, we believe in what we call a primordial nature of human beings.
Yeah.
And we say that God has created us with a certain nature, and all human beings have that, which is a natural inclination to believe in one God. And there's a kind of, I don't know if you would get indicators of that. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, it's not so much about being technically termed a Muslim or someone who believes in, but someone who believes in God and one God.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
Because the codified doctrine of Islam came with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yeah.
And if I'm mistaken about that, God forgive me. But the belief in one God has been there from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
The belief in one God and no associations, no other kind of things. So the personality, human personality, is developed from that primordial nature.
Okay.
Like how you interact with other people affects your belief in the one God.
Yeah.
Or how you control your impulses, your thought processes, your emotions, your affect. They all have to be connected in some way to that one belief.
Okay.
To that belief in one God.
Okay.
Which is what we believe as Muslims.
Yeah. There's a lot of humility in the Islamic faith. I mean, I mean, I know when Muslim people pray as well, it's like they do that, right? Or they
it's kind of this.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is a kind of,
it's like a show of humility.
Yeah, and it's sort of throwing everything behind you.
Okay.
The world.
Okay.
Because now you're in a one-on-one conversation with God. I mean, you wouldn't hear his reply, obviously, but it's sort of throwing everything back, and now you're in conversation with your Lord.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would say there is because Islam, the word Islam comes from that, you know, a submission to the will of God.
Okay.
And your personality, or you should allow your personality to be dictated by that submission.
Yeah.
You know, and of course they say, you know, Islam is perfect, Muslims are not. You know, we are all deviant in some way. Yeah. And because we have these bestial and predatory qualities and demonic qualities in us.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to actually
transcend that, see?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't discussed?
No. I think I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to ask, Ryan.
I think I've asked. No, there isn't really, to be honest. Yeah. But hopefully we can do this again because I really enjoyed it. So it was cool.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks for coming. Okay.